Good evening, namaste, and welcome to the Festival of Bharat. My name is Citti. I'll be your host for tonight. We are with Rami Desai ji. She is a popular face on the channel and she runs her own show called Insight with Rami Desai. And today she joins us on a conversation about missionary activities in South India. Rami ji, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here. Namaste, how are you?
Namaste, Sharon. It is such a pleasure to be here and being interviewed by you again. So thank you for inviting me, and I hope to do justice to this subject, which is extremely large in nature, but extremely important.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you here too. And on that note, let me ask you my first question. Let's deal with the basics, right? What is conversion? Let us address the definitional issue first. And how do you differentiate between propagation of religion, which is a constitutional freedom given to us, and conversions?
So Sharon, I find there are two ways to look at this question. One is, of course, legally, and the other one, more importantly, is logically. To simply put the definition of religious conversion, it is a process that entails a change of religious affiliation, of a worldview, and an identity. It makes you see yourself in a way that erodes your history. But when the process is under discussion, the question of how, to whom, and when one propagates becomes really important. Now, legally, like you mentioned too, the Indian Constitution provides an endorsement to the freedom of religion in India. And it's not just reserved for citizens of India, but it's also reserved for anybody who is residing in India. Now, this freedom of religion starts to get really murky over the issue of religious conversion. There have been many cases in the apex courts that have spoken about and have had the opportunity to make this distinction and to discuss this. And what it finally comes down to is that the former, which is propagating religion, is a fundamental right. But the latter, which is religious conversion, especially through fraudulent means, is illegal. Now, to quote one of the cases, and I'm not a legal mind, I'm an anthropologist, but it's important to know that one of the legal cases, for instance, Ramdas ji versus the state of Andhra Pradesh, had discussed this, exactly what you've asked, the right to propagate one's religion, which the court decided means the right to communicate a person's belief, to be able to tell other people and expose the tenets of that faith to other people. But it does not include the right to convert the person that you're propagating this to via inducement or force or greed or so on and so forth. Therefore, one can say that, propagation enjoys constitutional protection under the right of freedom of religion, but conversion does not. And, this is only one part of it. But I think the important distinction here has to be made simply by how we look at it logically. Logic should simply tell us, Sharon, that propagating by the nature of the act itself aims to and finally leads to religious conversion. And it leads to religious conversion becoming more and more aggressive and more assertive. And, this debate remains murky, and it creates opportunities for people to take advantage of it. Now, additionally, and this is just one last thing, I feel that logic should really tell us that the change of faith from one religion, from one faith to another, should be solely on the basis of some amount of spiritual content, spiritual experience, those seeking to change their faith should have encountered a spiritual experience or a trigger for them to be prompted to do this, for them to be prompted to leave aside their former faith. It should not, in any case, be advertised to and induced through fraudulent means of conversion, bereft of any spiritual content and experience. And that is where logic and the collective consciousness of society becomes really, really important, because that is probably going to prevent such fraudulent means more than law ever can.
Very interesting. Ramiji, in those who are a few people who are in defense of conversions, whether by whatever means possible, are saying that, okay, this is an issue, but why is it so important? How does this actually change the social fabric of the country?
So, Sharon, I have been of very strong belief that religious conversion to begin with, in, like I said earlier, the act in itself is because you feel that the other person's religion or the faith that they follow or the spirituality that they seek is not good enough. It is not good enough to the extent that they need to break bonds, they need to demean it, and adopt another faith that is absolutely alien to them. Now, this creates a certain amount of identity, neo identity consciousness, as well as conflict. Now, the impact of religious conversion, in my opinion, has always been devastating. And, you know, in a country like ours that is united by ancient civilizational bonds, erasing these bonds, breaking these bonds, because, like I said, the nature of religious conversion rests on the erosion of your former faith, itself ruins and destroys the social fabric, the civilizational bond that we are connected with. And this we have seen in multiple places in Bharat as well, but we'll come to that a bit later. But religious conversion at the end of the day promotes exploitation of vulnerable groups. It promotes demographic change. It promotes demographic change to such an extent that it leads to political assertion, political articulation, you know, an erosion of ancient cultures, Sharon, values, inclusion of a superiority complex. All these results of religious conversion, finally, in my opinion, and I've done enough fieldwork and anthropological study on this to be able to say this firmly without any doubt in my mind, leads to one of the most important issues in our society, and that's the impact on national security. Right. So I think anybody who says that, oh, you know, religious conversion does not have a larger impact has not studied this process in detail and has not studied the triggers as well as the frameworks that they work within with.
Right. It is definitely an impediment to national security, and you bring up a very, very important point. Now, you've done a lot of groundwork, you've done academic research on the subject. What are the main target areas of people who are aiming to proselytize, and why?
So, unfortunately, for missionaries and people who want to convert, irrespective of what faith they come from, Sharon, the target groups will always, without any doubt, will always be our vulnerable groups. Whatever the societal fault lines are the areas that are exploited. Now, it is difficult and possibly nearly impossible for them to convert someone's faith if they are educated, if they are well-to-do, if they are urbanized, if they're worldly wise. I'll give you an interesting anecdotal archival note from my studies in the Northeast. David Scott was the commissioner of what was Assam during the colonial times. He was the commissioner of Assam till I think 1831. And he was very invested in wanting to convert the tribal populations in the region, because they encountered, when the British went in, they encountered this population which was putting up a very strong resistance against the colonial administration. And of course, individuals in positions of power in the government were obviously keen on promoting their religious commitments towards these individuals. So he actually wrote a letter to the chief secretary of the British government at that point, called W.B. Bailey. And he actually said, he made a very, very, I think, a very crucial point, that even though missionaries are functioning in India, the reason that they have not, like in other places that the colonialists went in, the reason that they have not been able to make a sufficient dent in the religious fabric of the Hindus is because the missionaries were preaching to the educated classes, that they were preaching to the upwardly mobile of Hindu society, wherein he was trying to build the case for missionaries being funded in the Northeast. So he said, wherein David Scott firmly believed that if W.B. Bailey was to provide funding, the actual dent would be made in these tribal areas, because these were, as they called them, root tribes. They were savages, they were innocent, they were unsuspecting, and there wasn't a lot of in their opinion, there wasn't a lot of logical thinking. So, they would be able to make a dent, and it was actually an error on British government's part to be wasting their time trying to convert the middle and the upper middle classes. So, this observation, I think, was also important in another context, that they were very aware of the idea of nationhood. And David Scott, in his letter to W.B. Bailey, also said that the fact that these tribes are at a very nascent stage of understanding the ideas of nation and nationhood, it would be a great time for us to go in and convert them. And in my opinion, he didn't detail this part, but in my opinion, it was because they were looking at it as creating a separate identity, and that these people could be exploited enough to understand what a modern Christian state could be, and that modern Christian state would be separate from the rest of Bharat. And as we have history to tell us, that they were very successful, and the longest running separatist movement comes from the areas that they aimed to convert, which were the vulnerable areas. Now, this is an this is an age-old trick. This is not, I don't think this is something that, is a strategy or a tactic that, has been created in modern days. This is something that has gone on with the advent of the Christian Crusaders, with the advent of Christians coming into even European tribal societies, or even them trying to convert groups like the Vikings. Conversion to me is like cannibalism. It eats up and destroys and diminishes whatever it can overpower. And I don't say this lightly, because you never, it's almost like you shy away from even leaving a trace of your past because you look down upon it. And in a country like ours, I feel that it is the Vanvasis, it is the poor, it is the marginalized. Now, to give you an example of, the extent of the vulnerable groups that they can focus on, is all we need to see is the recent case in the UP conversion racket. They were aiming at deaf children, Sharon, to send them on suicide missions against their own nation. So these are, I think, the vulnerable groups wherever they might be, whoever they might be, it is the fault lines that they exploit.
Absolutely. And especially with narratives emerging from the United States, when we look at dismantling global Hindutva, they are particularly targeting the DBA communities, what they call it, Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasis. Now, it all makes sense when you beautifully elaborated the reason why conversions happen in certain areas. Now, coming to South India, which is the focus of our study, especially coming from the South as someone who has studied in missionary institutes all his life, we have never been exposed to the true history of missionaries in South India. What is the true history of missionaries in South India?
Well, one has to start from Christianity in South India, because Christianity in Kerala is believed to have been brought in by St. Thomas, and that, of course, was at some point rejected by the Vatican and then hesitatingly accepted as well. But that phase of Christianity, I believe, was fairly peaceful. I also find, and one of the main reasons for actually the Advent being peaceful is that Hindus, by and large, are peaceful people. They're very open-minded and they want to accept new ideas. They want to accept new forms of spirituality. But having said that, the Christian converts in the 1st and the 2nd century created a sort of a hybrid religion in terms of, following traditions and customs, like down south, they'd wear flowers in their hair, they'd wear tilak, they'd still grow tulsi in their yards. But then complications really began with the advent of the Portuguese. You see, a resolution was passed that Christians cannot follow what they consider satanic practices, that this hybrid culture that was practiced in India in its limited way, the Christian identity could not allow, because this was against their, they didn't understand these practices. They looked at it from a superior lens, where they looked at these as pagan practices, so on and so forth, So they were not very happy with these local customs being merged with Christianity. Now, in resistance, there was a resistance to this as well, There were Christian converts who refused to give up their Hindu traditions and organized a counter event to this law being passed.
Right.
Now, where the event was held was really important, because the event in itself was important. The reason it was important is because this was possibly with the advent of this sort of forceful imposition of not just religion but culture happening. It became very evident that the Hindu traditions are very difficult to completely wipe out, because it's a part of people's day-to-day lives. Now, when this resistance also happened, you have to understand this is a split within the Christian fold. So that place is still known as, and forgive my pronunciation, Kunnan Kurish, which literally means the Hunchback Cross. And it gets its name because there was this huge granite cross that was brought up and as a symbol of the resistance. And it was brought in for Christians who wanted to follow their traditional customs to take a vow at. So they were to come to the cross and kiss the cross. And this was almost this was in 1653. So, after half a century of the increasing influence of this oath, it was, it was like a pledge to liberate themselves from the Portuguese domination. And the cross bent somehow when they were pulling it, and it's a granite cross. So therefore it's called the Hunchback Cross. But, as we know, during that time, the Portuguese were playing havoc. And Pope Nicholas V issued a diktat that said that the Kingdom of Portugal had the monopoly on forcing Christianity upon the people that it ruled, and which pretty much meant the people of Bharat, along with monopoly to trade in monopoly to trade on behalf of the Roman Catholic Empire in Asia. And these people hated local traditions, and this is one of the most gruesome stories in the history of the advent of missionaries, because hating these local traditions was followed by it was followed by Christianity taking up a role to enforce the religion up on the native citizens, and that included shutting down temples, that included bloodshed, it included mass executions, it included all sorts of all sorts of rights being set aside, just to ensure that just to ensure that this religion was followed. And that's when the rift starts coming in. You see, for this process to have been initiated to convert the Goan residents to Roman Catholicism, they had to sort of take control of the people that they were ruling, which is also very unnatural to people in Bharat, because we're fairly, like I said, we are fairly accepting, and we don't enforce our religion on anyone. We don't go out of our way to colonize. So these were all ideas that were very different to us, and it created a split in society. It created the creation of a radical side, which was propelled by missionaries. And you have to see, even there's that Francis Xavier, who wrote to King John III of Portugal in around 1546 and said, let's impose the Inquisition on Goa, because we are not being able to discipline them. It is very, there was a point where it was very natural for us to put up resistance. And that resistance at some point, I feel we have lost. So even though some people in Kerala had converted to Christianity, they put up this resistance against these orders to continue with their Hindu customs. But that gave rise to a radical side of the religion, which was propelled by missionaries. And it was the missionaries, it was the church leaders, that pushed for the Inquisition, which banned apostasy of Roman Catholics to Hinduism, Judaism, or Islam. And it was not just Hinduism. It also had a ripple effect around that time. And the radical forces appeared. However, I find it that what we face today is possibly more difficult than what we faced earlier, because the new converts and the new missionaries are like salesmen. They are like traders. They are selling a religion, and people there are people who are willing to be bought because they are exploiting what they don't have, and which is usually basic necessities or education or a little money. But just to make one last point, the fact remains that Hindus are peaceful by nature. So if we say that the advent of this religion right at the beginning was peaceful, it is because of the society that we have created, which happens to be egalitarian by nature, not entirely because they came in with a different mindset.
Thank you so much for that, Ramiji. Very interesting insights. Now, there is a recent phenomenon which is coming out in Kerala. Perhaps it's coming out in the mainstream media per se. Is that Christians and the church are recognizing and legitimizing the of say love jihad and narco jihad. Why is this happening?
Here, do you mean to say legitimizing means they accept that this is happening, or they
Yes.
don't? Yeah. So I think the church recognizes the issue of love jihad, and it does so because we've seen the amount of young girls that have been affected. I remember one of the earlier reports that came out on love jihad, which was around in 2008. There were over 500 girls who had filed complaints, and the church had collected this information. But where legitimizing begins is when uh, where legitimizing begins is when the church leaders, religious leaders, the missionaries, the educated people within these religious folds actually come up and call out issues that have an impact on our social fabric or have an impact on our country per se. Having said that, I think on one hand, they accept that this is happening in a place like Kerala. But on the other hand, I have also heard and read reports, and I haven't had the privilege of traveling to these areas, but I have read enough reports that say that in areas like Kanyakumari or southern Thiruvananthapuram, there are Christian boys who are being funded to attract Hindu girls, to convert them. It is called Love Cross, which has been created in the same, which is a reflection of love jihad. So, unlike Kerala, where they are up in arms against this because it is affecting them directly, in other places, I find they're employing the same fraudulent tactics. And that to me then brings down the value of you standing up against something that is illegal, that is a human rights violation, only when it is affecting you. When it affects somebody else, that is not an issue for you. So, I don't know whether saying legitimize that they are legitimizing these things or these situations is actually entirely correct, because they're only legitimizing it where they are being affected. They're not legitimizing it where they're not being affected. I'm sure if you were to ask a church leader about love cross in these areas, he'd say it isn't happening. Now, this is not just a moral obligation. To be able to call a spade, irrespective of your religious affiliation and loyalty, is a question of national duty and national importance. And by remaining silent or turning a blind eye, it just widens the fault lines again in our social fabric in our country, which should be a primary concern for everyone who lives within the geographical boundaries and civilizational fold of Bharat.
Absolutely. You don't see the church legitimizing this concept in, say, a place like Uttar Pradesh. And you raise a very, very important point. Moving to a much more lighter subject. In fact, it's not a lighter subject if we get into the depth of it. We receive these videos and we see these videos on Facebook, YouTube, and WhatsApp where a crowd is hysterically dancing to a pastor to an evangelist who is trying to sort of perform miracles and heal them of all kinds of diseases. And one state in particular stands out as far as evangelical activities are concerned, and that is Tamil Nadu. Is there a particular reason that Tamil Nadu is sort of falling to this trap of the evangelicals?
Okay, so let me begin with saying that, this is not limited to Tamil Nadu, this is not limited to South India. You see it throughout the country. And I think it comes from, if we were to really try to go to the root of it, it comes from the fact that within Sanatan Dharma, the black magic, the idea of the cult, the idea of sorcery, among many other such beliefs, is sort of in the periphery. Now, the Vedas might not accept it or legitimize it. The Vedas might be really clear that it's disconnected to our scriptures per se, but for many, it's a way of life. You see, look at some of the look at some of the situations in the tribal belt. Look at some of the situations in remote areas. There is a huge belief in this other side of spirituality, in this other side of the spirit world, in maybe the dark side of magic, maybe in like I said, the occult, but also I find that there is this fact that we cannot deny that there's poverty, there's suffering, there's illiteracy. All of this combined together creates a very, very fertile ground to sell this sort of like you rightly said, like comical ways and methods of pushing religion. There is actually, in the same vein, let me tell you that there's actually a subject that was developed for liberation theology, which actually strategizes, talks about how easy it is to be able to convert in areas like the tribal belts, because it is, it believes in the idea of another world being able to solve your suffering in this world, because of the poverty, because of the kind of you can almost create a want in these people because they've lived such simple lives till now. So this whole idea that miracles, somebody will come from somewhere, the other world will solve all my problems, is very much alive. But of course, in places like the down south, there's also, one has to mention the fact that the caste system was so prevalent. It had created the kind of divisions that it had created, that it became, and again, the caste system creates the divisions where it is actually the backward castes that become the vulnerable groups, wherein you find the missionaries strategizing to attract those castes. Now, those castes are more often than not poorer. Therefore, you can sell this entire strategy of, oh, I'll heal you, oh, a miracle is going to happen, oh, believe in this God and we'll alleviate your poverty. We will treat you like equals. Now, this is a completely fraudulent concept, because once you convert, there is still this idea of what caste of convert you are. But this is how they've sold it. And, places like Tamil Nadu, because of this high level of implementation of the caste system in this modern social framework way, it became really easy for these missionaries to come and make up all these stories, pretend, and create this farcical idea of miracle workers.
Thank you so much for those insights, Ramiji. Now, if we could revisit a chapter in Tamil Nadu's history, in 1981, there was a huge controversy that broke out as far as conversions in Meenakshipuram was concerned. And the then Chief Minister, Jayalalitha, spoke on this, and she said that, there is going to be an anti-conversion law that is going to be sort of brought out in the Tamil Nadu Assembly, but we don't see a lot of stringent measures being taken in that particular states, which seems to have this issue of conversions more than any other state. What was the reason, and what is being done about this?
So, obviously it failed to take off there, and the answer to what happened there is very simple. It was opposed because of the fear of political polarization in, her favor. Now, the Justice Venugopal Inquiry Commission, which was set up after the Meenakshipuram conversion issues, recommended a law that banned forcible conversions. And at that time, the then Chief Minister gave approval, but somehow it was shelved. But Jayalalitha gave it new life, and the opposition and the minorities thought that, she was playing to the Sangh Parivar. And not just that, the opposition got a major, they got a major thrust when they put together all these minority organizations, Dalit groups, political parties. They put everybody together except the BJP and the AIADMK, and participated in a demonstration in Chennai. Now, at that time, it's interesting to note that the DMK leader Karunanidhi said that conversions like in Meenakshipuram happen because Dalits are being tortured by upper caste Brahmins, upper caste Hindus, and they still practice the two tumbler system, which was that one is served tea in a tumbler and the other person is served tea in another tumbler, like you don't drink out of the same cup. And this was obviously a political strategy. And I think even at this point, it would be really, really difficult to bring in a law like this, simply because the minorities and the opposition, political opposition, is going to come up and say, oh, well, this law is going to be used to torture us. How do we know that, these laws, anti-conversion laws, will not have a backlash on the people who have already converted? How do we know that these anti-conversion laws or these laws to forbid conversion will not be used towards us and towards us in terms of maybe wrong people will get implicated. So there were all these ideas of fear that were being brought up then and that will be brought up today. But at the end of the day, I think the fear is political consolidation for anybody who brings this law in. So it will always be opposed. And I don't think in reality, Sharan, that anytime soon that this can effectively be brought in as well as implemented.
You're right, because if there is another movement that is slowly gaining mobilization, it is the Free Hindu Temples movement, and it's been going on, under different names and different personalities for a while now. But it has somehow failed to take off because the autonomy is still with the government in South India largely. And you see that in states like Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, you have non-Hindus being appointed to the boards of these temples. Could you share some light as to what this entire fiasco is about and how this can be resolved?
So of course, we know what Free Hindu Temples is about. We know that, there are a certain amount of temples that are under government control. But having said that, it is an important movement. It is a fundamental right. And it is a fundamental right for the Hindu community. And to that end, we must come to a conclusion at the earliest. I know that it hasn't come to a fruition till now, but I am sure it will. The fact again remains that there was a time that Hindu society had the courage to build up resistances, had the courage to resist laws being brought in, had the courage to resist all sorts of alien superimpositions. Having said that, we have to go back into history and try to understand why this was allowed to happen in the first place, why a consolidated resistance was never brought up, and what is wrong with our society or our communities, that when issues like this are taking place, it isn't in the larger consciousness of the Hindu society. Of course, we must refrain from looking at this movement from just a political lens, because I think what we require right now in terms of intervention within the Hindu society goes far beyond politicizing issues like these, these are Hindu temples. This is not up for, it shouldn't be up for political debate and deliberation or political encouragement for anybody's political career. But alongside this, we have to understand that apart from temples not being in our control, plaguing our society, it is also how we are treating the Hindu society, the Hindu religion as well. One cannot say that this issue, the free temple issue, is irrespective of any other issues plaguing our temples. Both political, social angles to this must go hand in hand. One cannot be without the other. We must prepare for the eventuality of our temples being freed, but much more than that. We cannot free our temples and then say, okay, now what? See, the colonialists used to plan for an entire century in advance to not just create a Christian fold, but a unified Christian fold, a Christian umbrella, to colonize a place, to go in, to give them religion, and to make them such faithfuls that they could form new identities. We never learned from that. So our ambitions are always short term, that, okay, let's free our temples. Why, along with this, are we not talking about preserving the sanctity of our temples, how to reform our administrative frameworks, how to encourage temples to give back to the idea of the importance of scriptural studies, to attend to the suffering of followers in a practical way? We need to do this to balance the impact of proselytizing religions. And, we must remember that in Sanatan Dharma, we don't have careers, we have dharma. And that duty we must perform to preserve our temples and our faith. We must not think, and I reiterate this, we must not think of freeing Hindu temples as a political chip, where people who are leading this movement are getting political mileage out of it. We cannot think of free Hindu temples as just freeing it from government hands. We need to look at it holistically in a complete way, look at where and how we want this great religion to develop. How do we protect this great religion? We keep saying, it's an eternal religion and we'll go on forever. I mean, you cannot look at it from that aspect. What do you mean it will go on forever? Oh, we have 1 billion people, but out of these 1 billion people, how many people are actually Hindus, or forget Hindus, are actually Sanatanis in the correct sense of being Sanatanis? How many people understand scriptures? How many people understand dharma? How many people read the scriptures? So, I think this entire narrative that ye religion chalte rahega, hame kuch karne ki zarurat nahi hai, is we are leading ourselves down, a bad road. And it is sad that after the kind of debilitating proselytization we've seen, which has been by force, murder, bloodshed, the desecration of our temples, we still look at things in such a narrow view by saying that let's just free our temples. No, I think let's free our society by actually looking at this issue in a complete manner.
Right. It has to be a bottom-up approach where there is enough social mobilization by the people, and there needs to be enough awareness for people to realize that this is beyond any political campaign.
Absolutely. Look at the way, Sharon, look at the way churches function. Every Sunday you have people attending them, you have organizations, charitable organizations, volunteer systems, missionaries who are willing to go to really, really difficult places, to promote their missions. How does all of this happen? All of this happens because the church supports them. So these are the kind of frameworks. I'm not saying these are the frameworks we should employ, but we have to have frameworks of our own that are effective and can be implemented.
Right, correct. One of the movies that gained a lot of spotlight, I mean, the movie is Spotlight, and
Yeah.
this sort of threw the entire scandal into limelight about how the church, in fact, the Vatican was actively involved in covering up sexual abuses by priests across America and, in fact, the world. In Kerala, we are seeing a lot of similar patterns emerge. Now, is there a history of sexual abuse in India and in South India, especially? And is there a pattern to all of this?
Mm, So, I'm glad you mentioned the movie Spotlight because it actually comes from a real life case of the
Yes.
Catholic Church, which was, I think, in early 2000s. And that was really well dramatized in this movie. And the priest at that church was accused of shockingly raping, molesting hundreds of children over many decades, and it was one of the cases that brought this entire abuse that is happening in churches to light. But I have to say, when you ask about is there a trend, I have to say the trend is similar across the world. Now, what happens is, as it is when you study cases of child sexual abuse, you realize that grooming is a very big part of it. You groom
Right.
children, just the way in love jihad. Love jihad in many countries is considered called uh, love grooming or something like that. It's called grooming, basically, that there is an extended period of time you have access to the child, and over a period of time you groom that child to completely be incapable of protesting to what that child is
Right.
going through. Now, what happens with church like institutions is, number one, there is an ability to groom because you are in constant touch with the child. They're at choir practice or they are at Sunday school, whatnot. There are all sorts of other activities also that the churches organize. Um, and that is one of the main reasons that this is fairly common. But having said that, the other reason is the religious sanctioned authority. Now, who are you going to complain against? Somebody that you think is, uh, is an authority, and that also a religious authority that comes with a certain amount of a certain amount of moral credit. Number three is the church turning a blind eye, because obviously, accusations like this towards a religious organization is not very easy to digest and has a lot on stake. But so the ability to groom religious authority, and the senior authorities turning a blind eye, all these points come together and make it a very conducive environment for situations like this to happen. Who are these kids going to complain to? And in India, moreover, so a lot of these children are from the poorer communities. Who is going to believe them? As it is a child. And these predators spend weeks and months, even they spend money and energy and all sorts of tactics they employ just to groom these children, so that they can finally violate them. They they we also don't realize, we don't talk about these things openly. um, we don't like to accept that that such ideas of religion can have something so dark going on, because we feel that all these cases only either happen by random strangers, or cases like this happen happen if the person themselves is provocative. But you don't realize that majority of rapes happen, majority of sexual abuse happens from the immediate community that is involved. So we don't have this understanding. In India, we don't talk about these things openly. We don't try to understand them in a deeper way. There is a taboo attached to them. So, of course, it's a free hand for religious institutions and leaderships who can cultivate children like this. And in the garb of being caregivers and moral guides. Now, because of a religious institution standing, because of the frequent rate of this sort of grooming that takes place, um, it was at one point really, really difficult for the church to actually accept, the Vatican to actually accept that this was happening. And, we probably only get to know the tip of the iceberg. The Vatican probably had far more information than we did. But because of the attached pride and because of the reputation of the religious institution, a lot of this is hushed up. It was hushed up for a long time. It was denied bluntly for a long time. But eventually this pattern was not just noticed in America or Europe, but also in India and Canada and United States and every other country where every other country where there were these kind of denominations that could attract a lot of young children. Having said that, the cover up is something that obviously affects all church institutions. And one of the saddest things that the church had done is the preachers, the priests that were accused of molestation, instead of bringing them to the book, they reinstated them, they relocated them. And that itself had a huge impact on, it had a huge impact on the Catholic community, because whatever said and done, there is an amount of trust that you give these religious institutions.
Right.
And when priests have been accused and it has come out to be true of this sort of these sort of actions, instead of taking action against them and standing up for what would be morally correct, you turn around and relocate them and allow them to possibly do this with other children. So this split the Catholic society in two. And in India as well, it's no different. Like I said, this is a pattern that we've seen all over the world. So I don't think in India the pattern changes. But we in India have to deal with far more difficult societal limitations to be able to speak about this, because the skepticism, the denial, not just by the people being accused, but also by the child's family is so evident. The first thing that comes into our mind is that, the shame of it all. If we go out and complain, what will the society say?
There is a stigma, yes.
There is the stigma attached to it. And other members of the same church might become suspicious, saying, stay away from this child, or stay away from this accuser, because they might accuse. There's this sort of distrust as well, because it's just in India, faith is so strong. And I believe that comes from the fact that, we are a little bit of a broken society. We are a little bit, we are vulnerable in terms of poverty, in terms of suffering, in terms of grief, that we go into this sort of, defense mode, where we feel that, no, these are messengers of God, or these are people who are carrying God's word. They cannot do anything wrong. And let me tell you, Sharon, in some cases, it's not just about the child being groomed. It's not just about that. It's about the whole society that may be groomed. So, for example, one of these sociologists who had done a very extensive study on grooming in church and actually figured out some patterns, also noted that in Ireland in the 1990s, the whole nation exhibited like a culture of disbelief towards abuse claims. And this was after widespread revelations. And it came to the conclusion that members of these faiths have more faith and loyalty to the institution than towards a victim. It was also found that in places like Nigeria, where it was the Pentecostal pastors, they groomed children and sexually abused them. They sexually abused them under the pretext of that we'll remove the demons out of you. The demonic suffering that you're undergoing will be something, if you do this, will dissipate and you will get relief. Now, this is again similar to India.
Yes.
Why do we think it doesn't happen in India? We are such great believers in the cult, in miracles, in like we discussed earlier, in otherworldly sort of experiences. That why do we think that our people will not trust these people when they say things like this? And also, these organizations sometimes can work almost like the mafias. So maybe if somebody tries to, even if a victim tries to complain, there might be an institutional block against them. They might not get admissions in the missionary schools that they're studying in. They might not get the benefits that they get. Even police stations, which of these children or these children's parents, there'll be far and few who will want to make the effort of going up to a police station. And a lot of these abuses, again, which is similar in India and it's been similar around, were not necessarily, cross-gender. It was a male pastor sexually abusing a young boy. Right. Now, there is additional stigma attached to it in India. So, all I'm trying to say is that this happens. There is a pattern to it. These patterns have been, they've been discussed. We've been able to reveal these patterns. But when we feel that the impact in a country is low, we must understand at times in countries like ours, developing countries, that a lot of times the victim does not have the space to actually bring these stories out.
Ramiji, you bring up very, very important points here. And if we were to look at the patterns emerging, especially after a person is victimized, a child is victimized and abused and violated, you see many of the cases are, they take it for an out-of-court settlement, so that there is no judiciary involved, there is no police involved, and it's all a hush-hush matter. Now, this happens more in India, especially because judiciary in the West and say America or Europe does give some sort of a financial assistance to the poorer sections of the society, but that unfortunately is not still prevalent in India. In that sense, there is an economic angle to this as well. Now, Indian Express, about 3 years ago, they published that the church in South India is involved in a lot of land scams, and this is an evident pattern ever since the days of colonialism. So could you share your insights on this, especially about the economic angle behind this?
Well, there isn't a whole lot for me to say on this, because this is evident. Land scams are evident. The kind of land holdings that the church has, one has to question is where did the money come from? What is the need to hold such land? What is the need to hold such land, forget in prime areas, but in remote tribal areas as well? During my travels in the Northeast, I found that the kind of money coming in for them to build the kind of institutions that they wanted to build, again, to attract the kind of population that they wanted to. A lot of these areas had huge, massive institutions. I won't name one of the states that I went to in the Northeast. In a tiny village which barely had roads, 700 crores had been pumped in to build a missionary institution.
Wow.
And this is tribal land, so I don't understand that in areas like this where Hindus are not allowed to settle, where they are not allowed to buy land, where they are treated like refugees in their own countries, how is it that these institutions have the kind of lands that they do, that typically is said to be preserved for,
Yes.
these are scheduled areas, so of course this is a big scam. Of course, this needs to be looked into. But on the other hand, there's also another problem of a lot of these organizations, like I said earlier, have worked in sort of an organized
Right.
mafia way, where and I'm not saying this particularly towards the church or anything like that. What I'm saying is that organizations have, and these organizations usually have the ability to put pressure as well on locals to be able to surrender their lands, on the basis of the kind of power that they wield in that society. So yes, it has multiple level
Right.
impact.
Right. Now, the Syro Malabar Church had attributed radical Islam as the reason why many young Christian women are falling for the trap of love jihad, right? And subsequently they convert to Islam. And there have been many cases, especially from northern Kerala, where they join Islamic State as well. And, but in states like, say, Bengal and Kerala, for a very long time there has been this narrative or a nexus of the Marxists and the Islamists, but now you see the dynamics, the socio-political dynamics being changed. Why is that happening?
So the Marxist missionary network is what you're talking about, and I think it still exists, but it exists mostly in a little clandestine way. But having said that, the communists are a strange bunch. They tend to rely on more radical forces, more powerful forces, more organized religions to partner with, because with Indian communists, there is this real obsession with this dismantling Hindus, and whoever they feel has the potential to support them on that, they tend to create a nexus with them. So at the moment, they've created a nexus with the Islamists, and Islamic organizations. They're relying on Islamic radicalization to take the Hindu community down. And, one of the reasons that the dynamic changed was during the issue that we spoke about earlier, which was love jihad, because love jihad was a time when the communists took the church to task. And this is when things started, the whole nexus started changing. But I still do believe that that kind of bond and that kind of nexus still exists. I don't think the Marxist missionary nexus has completely been nullified. It's still there. And eventually you have to understand, a lot of people, when we talk about these organizations, when we talk about the missionaries, when we talk about the Islamists, this may not be representative of what an average Christian feels, but the leadership is so politically charged that bonds here are made based on the political benefits and have absolutely no religious content or social bonds that tie them together. So these nexuses can keep changing as and when they need to be.
Right. So it's a nexus of convenience rather than a nexus of coagulation.
Exactly.
Right. Very beautifully put. Now, okay, I'm going to oversimplify this because a lot of self-appointed representatives from the church or the Christian community say this, especially about as far as illegal conversion, forced conversions concerned, right? They are like, if the accuses the Christians or the church of such conversions, why is there no difference in terms of the population growth? Because it's been more nominal when it comes to the Christian population growth over the several decades.
That's a good question, and it has a very simple answer. And the answer is that how do we know that everybody is actually, is actually legally converting? Because taking an example from down south, I remember there was this point where at one point the notifications, the Gazette notifications had increased in such a number that an average person who was reading the newspaper suddenly realized that, oh my God, the conversions, there are a lot of conversions that are happening. And a lot of people who were on ground, who were privy to this information, said that there was explicit information that was passed around saying, look, convert, follow the faith, but do not notify the authorities, because this way you can keep the benefits that come to you, but you can also be a Christian and receive those benefits as well. And you don't need to really tell the authorities, because you just ensure, we just expect you to come to church, to read the Bible, and to profess your faith in the religion. So it is very important to consider this fact that the 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 population, especially amongst Christians, is probably much higher than we believe it to be. One of the pastors down south also openly said that I encourage uh, all the Christians across Bharat to come and to come and to come and reveal themselves, because I want the nation to know that we are not 3% or whatever, we are 35%. So clearly within the church fold, within the missionary activities, it is well known that the Christians are much higher in number than we believe them to be. So I don't think we should be under this misconception that it is growing nominally. I think we might be really shocked when the numbers come out. Now, I'll give you an example, not from the south, but from Arunachal. I'll tell you that there was I think there was about 0.7% of converted people in early 1970s. By 2010, there were 30%. And when in 2020, it was said that there would be at least 40%. But when I spoke to the tribals on ground who have been affected by forceful conversions, according to them, this was really, really an understatement. They said there are actually about 60%. Now, even if that is a exaggeration, the fact that people who have been affected by forced conversion are saying that means the ballpark figure might be right. So, just to conclude, I'd just like to say, I don't think we should take this at face value. I think it's, the numbers are far deeper than we think they are.
And that leads to an erosion of identity, like you were telling last time, and that leads to a whole range of issues, like which are detrimental to even national security. Now, I know that we are short on time and we've had a very long conversation, so I'll ask you a last question. There is a phenomenon, or rather a practice, where even the average Hindu family in India sort of glamorizes and wishes their children to be educated in the best missionary institute across India, right? Now, why is there such a practice prevalent even today, 70 years after independence, where you see all the best colleges in India perhaps are Saint Xavier, Saint Joseph, Saint Paul's, Christ, La Martiniers. Why is there such a trend, and what can be done about this?
You know, I think it's very interesting because it's true that the schools, the missionary schools, used to be considered the best schools, and there were multiple reasons for it. One of the reasons were that it became fairly important to be able to learn English during the time of the colonialists, because the colonialists favored people who were more anglicized in nature. The colonialists were famous for building this entire caste of people in India called the Brown Sahibs. You know, the Brown Sahibs were brown in color, but were whiter than the whites in personality. So going to a missionary school was, possibly the only way you could learn this sort of Western ethos and culture and speak in English and be able to mingle around with other European children whose parents were in India. This was one of the primary reasons. For instance, my mother is from Namatna in Lucknow, and one of the reasons that she and her siblings were sent there because there were no great schools in the remote areas that my grandparents had to travel in. And this seemed like a good idea. But in today's date, I think it has to do a lot with the fact that we're still suffering from a hangover. The hangover still tells us that, these are good schools, they are stricter, and they give you more anglicized training, which is not needed any longer. But with the rise of fancier schools with better amenities, because this has become like a business. The schools that are coming up are very high grade in quality, which the missionary schools cannot keep up with. I do see a change where instead of just focusing on missionary run schools, people are also looking at other schools, which might be 3 times the price, but they would rather send their children there because of the kind of amenities that are provided. Having said that, I think it's important to look at the fact that, here when we talk about missionary schools and non-missionary schools, we're talking about people who can afford them. There's also been the larger amount of conversions has been done in, let's say, the poorer classes of the society, as well as the more vulnerable castes of society. These are the areas that they infiltrated in. Now, as you know, in India, it's fairly easy to include caste anywhere. Yes. And that, when it is used against the Hindus, is a lethal weapon. It's always been easy to infiltrate into Hindu communities and proselytize, as, there were these caste divides. Now, where do the children of these people who have been converted from these groups go? They cannot afford these new schools. Yes. So they continue to go to missionary schools. And, missionary schools, we don't just think about in terms of in urban cities. Missionary schools are all over remote areas. And it's sad because these children feel that this is where we get an opportunity, that we will not get an opportunity to do better in a government school or in a local, run school, that because these schools are free, because these schools have English education, and because we have this colonial hangover where we think that modernism and westernization is equivalent to Christianity, it becomes more attractive for these people to go to missionary schools.
Absolutely. In Bangalore, there is a very interesting case, and I'm sure these examples can be found throughout the country. I'm not going to name the institution, but it's a very prominent one. Initially, at the time when the missionaries built this institute, there was some sort of ethnic and a racial profiling, where the European kids could go to one school and the Indian kids were sent to the other school. And the practice is somehow, it's not based on ethnicity or race today, but it's based on economics. So the poorer kids get sent to the Indian school, and the richer kids who are much more sophisticated get sent to the European school. It's practiced even today, and I'm talking about this part being in the central part of Bangalore, and we rarely talk about this right now. The gods alone know what happens in tribal areas, and it's always fascinating to hear from you, because you're not somebody who just is on your desk researching about this, but you're constantly on the move. You're on the ground. You give us insights from there. This has been extremely a very, very interesting conversation, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the Festival of Bharat. Thank you so much for joining us, Ramiji.
Thank you, Sharan. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always great to have a discussion with you. It is such a privilege to be on the Festival of Bharat, and to discuss a subject like this. I think we can't discuss it enough, because there are so many elements to it. And I hope to continue covering these areas. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I hope you can join us for future conversations as well. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please do like, share, and subscribe to the Festival of Bharat and Citti Media. Until then, this is your host, Sharan Citti, signing off. Namaste.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.